was handsome, intelligent, well-spoken. The kind of man you'd trust in a heartbeat. A law student, a political campaign worker, a loving boyfriend. But behind the charm was something monstrous. Between 1974 and 1978, Ted Bundy led a double life. One as the all-American man, and the other as one of the most sadistic serial killers in U.S. history. He didn't just murder women. He hunted them, manipulated them, and mutilated them. And the scariest part? He made them feel safe first. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, under a lie. Raised believing his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister, Ted's life began with deceit. It wouldn't end there. By the 1970s, Bundy had moved to Seattle, Washington. He was a law student, had political ambitions, and even volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline. Colleagues described him as polite, charming, and caring. But behind his easy smile and warm eyes, something horrifying brewed. Bundy had a type. Young white women with long dark hair parted down the middle. Women who resembled his first love, Stephanie Brooks, who broke his heart in college. Some say his entire killing spree was a twisted revenge fantasy to hurt her again and again. In 1974, women in the Pacific Northwest began to vanish. On January 4th, Karen Sparks, a University of Washington student, was bludgeoned in her bed with a metal rod. She survived, but suffered permanent brain damage. She was the lucky one. Then came Linda Healy, who vanished from her basement bedroom in Seattle. Her bed was made, her alarm clock was off, and her pillow was stained with blood. Her skull was later found on a mountain with others. Bundy had begun his spree, and no one suspected him. He often wore a sling or a fake cast, asking women for help loading books or lifting a sailboat onto his Volkswagen Beetle. Once they were close, he bludgeoned them unconscious, cuffed them, and drove off into the night. Bundy's murders were methodical and cold. He raped his victims, strangled them, and sometimes returned to their corpses to violate them again. He posed their bodies, washed their hair, and applied makeup, creating grotesque dolls out of the dead. From Washington to Oregon to Utah to Colorado, the body count grew. Women went missing from campuses, parks, and shopping malls. July 14, 1974 was especially brazen. Bundy abducted 2 women in broad daylight from Lake Sammamish State Park. Witnesses recalled a man named Ted with a cast on his arm. The police finally had a name, but there was no arrest. Not yet. In August 1975, police pulled over Bundy in Utah. They found handcuffs, a ski mask, an ice pick, rope, and trash bags in his car, the tools of a predator. He was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping of Carol Duranch, one of the few women who escaped his grasp. She had fought him off after he impersonated a cop and tried to cuff her. Authorities finally began to link him to other disappearances. In 1977, while facing murder charges in Colorado, Bundy represented himself in court and used the law library to plot his escape. Bundy escaped custody twice. The first time, he jumped from a second-story courthouse window during a recess. He ran for 6 days before being captured. The second escape was worse. He cut a hole in the ceiling of his cell, crawled through ducts, and walked out of jail dressed as a deputy. While police searched Colorado, Bundy was already in Florida, preparing to kill again. On January 15, 1978, just weeks after his escape, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. What he did next was pure savagery. He beat and strangled 4 women, raped 2, and mutilated their bodies. He bit one of them so hard that dental records would later convict him. 2 weeks later, Bundy kidnapped and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, his youngest victim. Her body was found in a pigsty. It was the final horror. Bundy was captured in February 1978. His charm began to fade, replaced with arrogance and desperation. He tried to defend himself again, filed motions, and made a media spectacle of the courtroom. During his Florida trial, which was the first to be nationally televised, Bundy smiled, joked, and even proposed marriage to a witness, Carol Ann Boone, in court. She accepted. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bundy's bite mark matched the wound on victim Lisa Levy. Witnesses, survivors, and forensics left no doubt. In 1980, he was sentenced to death by electric chair. For 9 years, Bundy stalled his execution by confessing to more murders, trying to barter information for his life. He eventually admitted to over 30 murders, though many believe the number could be over 100. He described in chilling detail how he kept bodies, revisited them, and even performed necrophilia. On January 24, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., Bundy was executed. Outside the prison, crowds celebrated. People cheered. Signs read, "Roast in Hell, Ted." The monster was gone, but his story still haunts America. Ted Bundy changed how we view serial killers. He wasn't a drifter, a loner, or a misfit. He was the man who sat beside you in class, helped elderly women cross the street, smiled at your daughter, and then killed without mercy. His legacy is a chilling reminder. Monsters don't always look like monsters. They can wear a smile, speak gently, and offer you help. And sometimes, that's the most terrifying thing of all. When police opened the refrigerator in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, they didn't expect to find a human head, wrapped in foil, sitting on the middle shelf like leftovers. What they found next, skulls, hearts, preserved genitals, and acid-filled drums of flesh, would shock the world. But the true terror wasn't just what Dahmer did after death. It was what he did while his victims were still alive. Charming on the surface, pure evil underneath. He was a predator unlike any other. A cannibal, necrophile, and killer who didn't stop at murder. He kept them, piece by piece. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His childhood seemed ordinary at first, but early signs of darkness emerged. He was obsessed with dead animals, often collecting roadkill and dissolving them in acid to study bones. He wasn't violent, not yet, but the fascination with death, decay, and control had already begun. As his parents' marriage disintegrated, so did Dahmer's grip on reality. Lonely, isolated, and grappling with his own homosexuality, he spiraled into a secret fantasy world, one where love, dominance, and death blurred together. In 1978, shortly after graduating high school, 18-year-old Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. They drank, talked, and hung out at Dahmer's house. But when Hicks said he wanted to leave, Dahmer panicked. He struck him with a dumbbell, strangled him, then dismembered the body and buried it in the woods. Later, he dug up the remains, dissolved them in acid, and flushed them down the toilet. It was a horrifying start to a monstrous pattern. For 9 years, Dahmer didn't kill again, but he drank heavily, was arrested multiple times, and his fantasies only grew more violent. By 1987, Dahmer couldn't hold back anymore. He met Stephen Tuomi in a bar and took him to a hotel. The next morning, Tuomi was dead. Dahmer had beaten him to death in a blackout. From there, he escalated fast. He lured men and boys to his home with offers of money, alcohol, or photography. Once inside, he drugged them, raped them, and strangled them, often keeping their skulls or body parts as trophies. He photographed the dismemberment, arranged body parts for rituals, and even cooked and ate human flesh. By 1991, the apartment reeked of death, but neighbors dismissed the smell. No one suspected what horrors were unfolding behind his door. Dahmer's apartment was a house of horrors. Inside apartment 213, police would later find a human head in the fridge, 3 more heads in a freezer, jars filled with preserved genitals, bleach-soaked skulls lined up on shelves, a 57-gallon drum full of dissolving torsos, a shrine of bones and candles Dahmer planned to complete, his altar of power. He wasn't just killing. He was trying to create obedient, permanent companions even attempting crude lobotomies by drilling holes in victims' skulls and injecting acid or boiling water while they were still alive. It wasn't just murder, it was inhuman experimentation. Between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men and boys, most of them young, gay men of color. Many were runaways or from vulnerable communities, which allowed him to operate in the shadows. Their names were Stephen Hicks, Stephen Tuomi, James Doxtator, Richard Guerrero, Anthony Sears, Raymond Smith, Edward Smith, Ernest Miller, David Thomas, Curtis Straughter, Errol Lindsay, Tony Hughes, Konrak Synthesomphone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Braidhoft. Each had a life, a story, a family. Each was reduced to bones, blood, and silence in Dahmer's hands. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer brought home a man named Tracy Edwards. Like the others, he was offered money to pose for photos. But once inside, Edwards sensed something was wrong. He noticed a foul odor, acid jugs, and a 55-gallon drum. Then Dahmer handcuffed him and threatened him with a knife, but Edwards fought back. He escaped and ran into the street, flagged down police, and led them back to apartment 213. What they found inside was unimaginable. The arrest of Dahmer shook the nation. Even seasoned detectives were traumatized by the scene inside the apartment. It wasn't just a crime. It was a descent into madness. In chilling detail, Dahmer confessed to everything. He spoke calmly about murder, cannibalism, necrophilia, and collecting body parts. He admitted to eating thighs, hearts, and biceps, saying it made him feel his victims were part of him. He felt completely out of control. He showed no emotion, except relief. "I should have been killed years ago," he said. In 1992, he was convicted of 15 murders and sentenced to 15 life terms, over 900 years in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't last long in prison. On November 28, 1994, while cleaning bathrooms at Columbia Correctional Institution, he and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, were beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow prisoner. Dahmer's skull was crushed with a metal bar. Some say it was justice served. Jeffrey Dahmer was not the monster in the shadows. He was the friendly guy next door, the man at the corner store, the quiet neighbor who smiled but kept to himself. His story is a terrifying reminder that evil doesn't always snarl. Sometimes it smiles. And behind closed doors, in the quietest apartments, the most unspeakable horrors can unfold. Imagine this: a man in clown makeup, laughing with children, entertaining at parties, even posing for photos with cops and politicians, but with dozens of decomposing bodies rotting beneath his home. That man was John Wayne Gacy, the charming neighbor from Chicago who dressed as Pogo the Clown by day, and by night lured young boys into his basement, never to be seen again. He wasn't just a serial killer, he was a sadistic predator, hiding horror behind a painted smile. And when the truth finally came out, 29 bodies under his house, 4 more elsewhere, America realized evil could wear the face of a clown. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. His childhood was plagued by an abusive alcoholic father who often called him Sissy and beat him senseless. Gacy craved male approval and attention, but grew up with self-loathing and deep emotional wounds. Despite his troubled upbringing, Gacy appeared to live a normal adult life. He became a successful contractor, married, ran multiple businesses, and even became involved in local Democratic Party politics, once shaking hands with First Lady Rosalind Carter in a now infamous photo. But there was something sinister hidden beneath that respectable surface. In the early 1970s, Gacy began dressing up as a clown, Pogo the Clown, and volunteered at local hospitals and events, entertaining children. He would later say, Clowns can get away with murder. At the same time, he developed a dark sexual appetite targeting teenage boys. He lured them to his house with promises of work, cash, or drugs. And once inside, the horror began. He called it his handcuff trick. He'd playfully show how he could escape handcuffs, then snap them onto his victims' wrists. But there was no trick. There was only terror. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys, most between the ages of 14 and 21. Some were drifters, runaways, or boys he hired through his construction company. Many just vanished without a trace. Gacy would handcuff them, beat them, strangle them with rope or garrote, then sexually assault and mutilate their bodies. Afterward, he hid the corpses in the crawl space under his home, stacking them on top of each other like garbage. As the smell worsened, Gacy poured lime and concrete over the bodies, or tossed them in the Des Plaines River. Neighbors complained of a stench. Gacy blamed plumbing issues. On December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Piest went missing after telling his mother he was going to see a man about a construction job. That man was John Wayne Gacy. Piest's disappearance caught the attention of Des Plaines police, who began investigating Gacy. A background check revealed a prior conviction for sodomy in 1968, something Gacy had managed to keep hidden. Police got a search warrant and entered Gacy's home. They found a suspicious crawl space, handcuffs, driver's licenses of missing boys, and a strong smell of death. Still, it would take a second warrant before the full horror came to light. On December 23, 1978, investigators dug beneath the crawl space and uncovered human bones. Then came another body, and another, and another. By the end, 29 bodies were recovered under the house, with 4 more found in rivers nearby. Gacy's property became a crime scene like no other, dubbed the House of Horrors. When questioned, Gacy confessed in chilling detail. He described the murders casually, as if recounting errands, even drawing a map of where each body was buried. He claimed the boys were his property, tools for his pleasure and control. In 1980, John Wayne Gacy stood trial for 33 counts of murder. His defense tried to plead insanity, citing his alternate personas: the businessman, the clown, the killer. But the jury saw through it. The evidence was overwhelming. The brutality of his crimes left the courtroom and the country stunned. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row, painting disturbing clown portraits which are now infamous in their own right. He showed little remorse, once saying, "I should never have been convicted of anything more serious than running a cemetery without a license." On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. His final words, "Kiss my ass." To the end, he remained defiant, cold, and unrepentant. John Wayne Gacy taught the world a horrifying truth. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear suits, shake hands with politicians, perform magic tricks for children. They laugh, they smile, they paint their faces like clowns. And while the mask slips eventually, for far too many, it slips too late.